Do you know what it feels like when someone half your age takes scissors to your hair without permission and tells you that you're disgusting in front of your entire family? When the woman your son married decides that humiliating his mother will somehow cement her position as the new queen of the household? There's a particular kind of cruelty that comes with being attacked by someone you've welcomed into your family. It doesn't just wound your pride, it shatters every assumption you had about love, respect, and what family really means. If you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll understand why some betrayals cut so deep they change you forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Why some people mistake kindness for weakness until it's far too late, and why a grandmother's love can transform into a grandmother's justice when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. This isn't about petty family squabbles or generational misunderstandings. This is about consequences. My name is Anna Marie Whitfield, and at 67 years old, I thought I had seen every possible way that people could disappoint you. I had buried my husband of 45 years, raised 3 successful children as a working mother, in an era when that wasn't common, and built a life of quiet dignity in the small coastal town of Millbrook, Oregon. I had weathered financial struggles, health scares, teenage rebellions, and all the ordinary catastrophes that make up a full life. What I hadn't prepared for was discovering that the young woman I had embraced as a daughter could harbor such casual contempt for everything I represented. That she could look at my silver hair I had worn with pride as a badge of survival, wisdom, and grace, and see only something outdated that needed to be corrected. That she could mistake my gentle nature for weakness and my grandmother's heart for an invitation to cruelty. I had always been the peacekeeper in our family. When my eldest son George divorced his first wife, I bit my tongue and welcomed his new girlfriend with open arms. When my daughter Penelope made questionable career choices that drained her savings, I helped without lectures. When my youngest Stanley struggled with addiction in his 20s, I stood by him through rehab and relapse with unwavering support. This is who I was, the mother and grandmother who smoothed over conflicts, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who hosted holidays without complaint, who babysat grandchildren at a moment's notice, who loaned money she couldn't afford to lose. I was the family's emotional center, the one everyone turned to when life got complicated. But 3 years ago, Stanley brought home Brianna. At 28, Brianna Morrison was everything I had never been: tall where I was petite, dramatic where I was understated, demanding where I was accommodating. She had the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences for bad behavior. From our first meeting, I sensed something calculating behind her bright smile. But Stanley was so obviously smitten that I kept my concerns to myself. Brianna had grown up wealthy in Portland, the only child of parents who had treated her like a princess, requiring constant entertainment and admiration. She worked sporadically as a social media influencer, though her income seemed to come primarily from her father's generosity and, increasingly, from Stanley's modest but steady salary as a dental technician. I watched my son, my sweet, gentle Stanley, who had fought so hard to build a stable life after his struggles, transform himself to accommodate Brianna's expectations. He bought her expensive clothes he couldn't afford. He took her on vacations that left him stressed about credit card debt. He moved out of his comfortable apartment into a trendy but overpriced loft downtown because she complained that his neighborhood wasn't Instagram-worthy. But I said nothing. I smiled when she criticized my cooking. I listened politely when she explained how people my age didn't understand modern relationships. I wrote generous checks for their engagement party, their wedding, and the down payment on their house. I did what grandmothers do. I supported my family's choices even when those choices concerned me. The wedding itself should have been a warning. Brianna had insisted on an elaborate affair that consumed most of Stanley's savings and required substantial financial help from both families. She treated the planning process like a movie production, with herself as both director and star. Every detail had to be perfect, every moment carefully curated for maximum social media impact. During the reception, I watched her pose for hundreds of photos, each one requiring multiple takes until she achieved the exact image she wanted. When elderly relatives tried to share stories or offer traditional toasts, she visibly bristled at the interruption to her choreographed celebration. When Stanley's grandfather, my late husband's father, struggled with his speech due to his recent stroke, Brianna actually rolled her eyes and tapped her watch. That night, I went home with a heavy heart, but I told myself she was young and would mature. I told myself that marriage would settle her, that responsibility would teach her empathy, that love would soften her edges. I was 64 years old and still naive enough to believe that people naturally grow into better versions of themselves. For 3 years, I watched Stanley's confidence slowly erode under the weight of Brianna's constant criticism and financial demands. I watched him work longer hours to fund her lifestyle while she contributed little beyond occasional sponsored posts about products she received for free. I watched him make excuses for her behavior when she snapped at waiters, ignored his friends, or threw tantrums when things didn't go her way. And still, I said nothing. Because that's what I had always done. Kept the peace, made allowances, protected the harmony of our family even when that harmony was built on everyone else accommodating one person's selfishness. But last month, on the occasion of my 67th birthday, Brianna finally showed me exactly what she thought of my patience, my generosity, and my place in our family. She showed me with scissors and cruelty and the kind of public humiliation that leaves scars no amount of time can heal. She made one crucial mistake that day. She mistook a grandmother's gentle heart for a sign of weakness. She confused my love for my family with an inability to defend myself when necessary. She assumed that because I had always chosen peace over conflict, I was incapable of choosing justice over forgiveness. She was wrong on all counts. The house I had shared with my late husband Robert for 42 years sat on 3 acres of carefully tended gardens in Millbrook, Oregon, overlooking the Coos Bay estuary. Robert and I had bought the property in 1978 when the land was cheap and the house was a modest 2-bedroom cottage badly in need of repair. Over the decades, we had expanded it room by room as our family grew and our finances improved. Every morning for the past 3 years since Robert's death, I walked the perimeter of our property with my coffee, checking on the roses we had planted. For each of our children's births, the vegetable garden that still produced more than I could eat alone, and the workshop where Robert had restored antique furniture in his retirement. These walks had become my meditation, my way of feeling connected to the life we had built together. At 67, I was proud of what we had accomplished. Robert had worked as a foreman at the local lumber mill while I ran a small but successful catering business from our kitchen. Neither of us had college degrees, but we had raised 3 children who all graduated from universities we couldn't afford to attend ourselves. George had become a civil engineer, Penelope a nurse, and Stanley had eventually found his calling as a dental technician after overcoming his early struggles. The catering business had been my passion project, born out of necessity when money was tight and the children were young. I started by making birthday cakes for neighbors, graduated to wedding receptions, and eventually built a reputation that brought clients from as far away as Eugene. My specialty was traditional comfort food prepared with modern presentation, techniques I had taught myself from library cookbooks and later, cooking shows. By the time I retired at 62, Whitfield Catering had a waiting list 6 months long for major events. I had saved enough to pay off the house, help my children with down payments on their own homes, and maintain a comfortable if modest lifestyle. The business had been my identity for 25 years, and letting it go had been one of the hardest decisions of my life. But Robert's cancer diagnosis had changed our priorities overnight. The last 5 years of his life were spent traveling to the places we had always promised ourselves we would visit someday, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Scotland to trace his family roots, Ireland to see mine, a cruise through Alaska that left us both breathless at the raw beauty of the landscape. We had burned through most of our retirement savings, but neither of us regretted a penny spent on those precious final years together. When Robert died, the grief hit me like a physical force. We had been married since I was 22 and he was 24, young people who grew up together, weathered every storm together, and planned to grow old together. The house felt impossibly empty without his presence, his terrible jokes, his morning ritual of reading the newspaper aloud while I prepared breakfast. For the first 6 months after the funeral, I barely left the property. My children took turns checking on me, bringing groceries, trying to coax me back into the world. It was Stanley who finally succeeded, showing up one morning with a border collie puppy he claimed needed a home. "Her name is Molly," he had said, setting the squirming bundle of black and white fur in my lap. "She's too energetic for my apartment, but I thought maybe you could foster her until we find her a permanent family." Of course, Molly never left. Within a week, she was sleeping on Robert's side of the bed and following me through my morning garden walks. She became my constant companion, my reason to get up each day, my bridge back to the world of the living. This was the life I had built for myself in widowhood. Quiet but content, solitary but not lonely, structured around the simple pleasures of tending my garden, spoiling my grandchildren during weekend visits, and maintaining the traditions that had always held our family together. I hosted every holiday, prepared elaborate birthday dinners for each family member, and maintained the role of family historian, the keeper of photo albums, the organizer of anniversary celebrations, the one who remembered everyone's favorite foods and accommodated every dietary restriction without complaint. When Stanley brought Brianna to meet the family for the first time at Easter dinner 2 years ago, I had prepared for weeks. I researched her background on social media, noting her dietary preferences and favorite cuisines. I planned a menu that would showcase my skills while remaining approachable for someone who might be nervous about meeting her boyfriend's family. The dinner had been a disaster from the moment Brianna walked through my front door. She arrived 45 minutes late, offered no apology, and immediately began photographing my dining room setup with obvious displeasure. Throughout the meal, she picked at her food while loudly declaring that she was mostly plant-based now, despite having posted photos of steakhouse dinners on her Instagram account just days before. But what truly shocked me was her treatment of Stanley. She corrected his grammar in front of the family, criticized his table manners, and rolled her eyes when he shared stories about his work. When he mentioned feeling proud of helping a nervous patient overcome their fear of dental procedures, she actually yawned and checked her phone. After dinner, while I was serving dessert, a chocolate cake I had spent hours decorating, Brianna announced that she didn't eat refined sugar and began lecturing the table about the dangers of processed foods. When my 6-year-old granddaughter from George's marriage asked if she could have Brianna's slice, Brianna snapped that children shouldn't be encouraged to develop unhealthy relationships with food. The silence that followed was painful. My granddaughter's face crumpled, and George quickly swept her up for a walk in the garden. Penelope made strained conversation about the weather while Stanley stared at his hands, clearly mortified by his girlfriend's behavior. I should have said something then. I should have politely but firmly established boundaries about how guests behave in my home, how family members treat each other, and what behavior I would and would not tolerate at my table. Instead, I did what I had always done. I smoothed over the awkwardness with gentle conversation, offered to pack leftovers for everyone, and privately resolved to try harder to understand this young woman who had captured my son's heart. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my kitchen with Molly at my feet and tried to understand what I had witnessed. Brianna's behavior had been rude, certainly, but perhaps she was nervous about making a good impression. Perhaps she had dietary restrictions she was embarrassed to discuss, Perhaps she was simply young and hadn't yet learned the art of gracious, social interaction. I made excuses for her because I loved Stanley, and Stanley loved her. I told myself that my role was to support my children's choices, not to judge them. I convinced myself that time and patience would bring out whatever qualities in Brianna that Stanley saw so clearly. How wrong I was about everything. The engagement announcement came 6 months after that disastrous Easter dinner, delivered not in person or even by phone call, but through a carefully staged Instagram post that appeared on my feed at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. The photo showed Brianna's manicured hand displaying a diamond ring against the backdrop of what I recognized as the overlook at Silver Falls State Park, a spot where Robert and I had taken countless family photos over the years. The caption read, "When you find your person, and your person finds the most perfect way to propose. Stanley Morrison, you have made me the happiest woman alive. Can't wait to start planning our dream wedding." Engaged. Blessed beyond words. He put a ring on it. I stared at my phone screen for a full minute, waiting for my emotions to catch up with what I was seeing. My youngest son had proposed marriage, and I was learning about it through social media like any other casual acquaintance. No phone call, no visit, no sharing of this momentous occasion with the woman who had raised him. When Stanley finally called 3 hours later, his voice carried the forced enthusiasm of someone trying to convince himself as much as me that everything was perfect. "Mom, did you see the post? We're engaged. Isn't it exciting?" "Congratulations, sweetheart," I managed, though my heart was breaking a little. "When did this happen?" "Last weekend. We went camping up at Silver Falls, and I proposed at sunset. By the overlook. You know, that spot where we used to have picnics when I was little?" The fact that he had chosen a location loaded with family memories felt like both a connection to our shared history and a betrayal of it. I wondered if Brianna knew the significance of that place, or if she simply saw it as another scenic backdrop for her content. "It sounds beautiful," I said, and I meant it. "I'm so happy for you both." "Thanks, Mom. We're thinking maybe a fall wedding next year. Brianna has some pretty big ideas about what she wants." I was sure she did. Over the following months, those big ideas would consume not just Stanley's time and finances, but mine as well. Brianna approached wedding planning like a military campaign, with mood boards, spreadsheets, and vendor meetings that required Stanley to take time off work. She hired a wedding planner whose fees alone exceeded what most people spent on their entire ceremony. My role in the planning process was made clear from the beginning. I was expected to contribute financially while having no input on decisions. When I offered to handle the catering through my network of former colleagues, a gesture that would have saved them thousands of dollars, Brianna smiled sweetly and explained that they needed professionals who understood their vision. When I suggested incorporating some family traditions into the ceremony, such as using my grandmother's Irish lace tablecloth or serving my late mother-in-law's famous dinner rolls, Brianna thanked me for my adorable suggestions, but explained that they were going for a more cohesive aesthetic. The guest list became another point of tension. Brianna wanted to limit the ceremony to immediate family only, which would exclude cousins, aunts, and uncles who had been part of every major family celebration for decades. When I gently pointed out that these relatives had helped raise Stanley and would be hurt by their exclusion, she sighed dramatically and agreed to allow them to attend the reception only, not the ceremony itself. "It's just that the photos will look so much better with a more curated group," she explained to Stanley while I stood in their kitchen, ostensibly there to drop off a casserole, but really hoping to spend time with my son. "You understand, right? This is our day to make everything perfect." Stanley nodded along, though I could see the conflict in his eyes. These were people who had attended his high school graduation, celebrated his recovery from addiction, and supported him through every milestone of his adult life. But he was so desperate to make Brianna happy that he was willing to sacrifice long-time relationships for her vision of perfection. The financial pressure was enormous. Stanley had taken a second job doing freelance dental hygiene work on weekends to help pay for the wedding expenses that kept escalating. Brianna, meanwhile, had quit her sporadic influencer work entirely, claiming she needed to focus full-time on wedding planning. I watched my son grow thin and stressed as the months passed. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, and he developed a nervous habit of checking his phone constantly for messages from vendors, wedding planners, or Brianna herself. When I asked how he was handling everything, he assured me he was fine, but his smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. The breaking point in our relationship came during a dress shopping expedition that Brianna had reluctantly agreed to include me in. We met at an upscale bridal boutique in Portland, where Brianna had scheduled appointments to try on gowns that cost more than I had spent on my car. For 2 hours, I sat in a velvet chair sipping champagne I didn't want while Brianna modeled dress after dress, each one requiring extensive photography and discussion about how it would photograph for social media. When she finally found the one, a stunning but ridiculously expensive creation that would require alterations costing nearly as much as the dress itself, she turned to me with bright expectation. "What do you think, Anna Marie? Isn't it absolutely perfect?" "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "You look radiant. I was hoping you might want to contribute to it," she continued, her voice taking on a practiced vulnerability. "I know Stanley would be so touched if you helped make this dream dress possible. It would mean so much to both of us." The dress cost $8,000. The alterations would add another $2,000. I had already contributed $5,000 to the wedding expenses, money that had come from my modest retirement savings. But looking at her hopeful face and thinking of Stanley's obvious stress about finances, I found myself nodding. "Of course," I heard myself saying. "I'd be honored to help." The thank you I received was effusive but brief. Within minutes, Brianna was back to photographing herself in the mirror, and I was invisible again. As I wrote the check, I told myself, this was what grandmothers did. We made sacrifices so our families could have their dreams. But driving home that afternoon, I felt a cold clarity settling over me. This wasn't about making dreams come true. This was about one person's endless appetite for luxury and attention, funded by other people's sacrifices. Stanley wasn't getting his dream wedding. He was getting Brianna's dream wedding, and the cost was consuming his health, his relationships, and his financial security. Still, I said nothing, because keeping the peace was what I had always done, and I didn't know how to be anyone else. The wedding itself was everything Brianna had envisioned: gorgeous, expensive, and perfectly documented for social media posterity. She looked stunning in her $10,000 dress. Stanley looked relieved that everything had gone according to plan, and I played my assigned role as the gracious mother of the groom, who was grateful to be included in such a perfect day. But as I watched them dance their first dance as husband and wife, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was witnessing not the beginning of a partnership, but the completion of a transaction. Stanley had paid for Brianna's perfect day with his savings, his health, and increasingly, his independence. What I didn't know then was that the wedding was just the beginning. Marriage wouldn't settle Brianna or teach her gratitude. Instead, it would embolden her to push even further, to test even more boundaries, until she finally pushed me past the point of gracious accommodation into something much more dangerous. The transformation from grateful daughter-in-law to entitled family dictator happened gradually, then all at once. The first 6 months of Brianna and Stanley's marriage revealed the true scope of her ambitions. With the wedding behind her and the social media content fully exploited, she turned her attention to reshaping the family dynamics that she found insufficiently deferential to her new status as Stanley's wife. It started with the holidays. For 30 years, our family had gathered at my house for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter. I had the largest dining room, the most complete set of china, and frankly, the energy and skill to coordinate meals for 15 to 20 people. It was a tradition that brought me joy and gave structure to our family's year. But 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Brianna announced that she and Stanley would be hosting instead. Not asking, not suggesting, announcing. She called it starting our own traditions as a married couple, but it felt more like a territorial claim. We just think it's time for the younger generation to take over some of these responsibilities, she explained to me over coffee, her voice sweet, but her eyes calculating. You've done so much for so many years, Anna Marie. You deserve to just relax and be a guest for once. The offer might have sounded generous to someone who didn't know Brianna well. But I could read the subtext clearly. She wanted control of the family gatherings, the ability to set menus and guest lists and seating arrangements according to her preferences. She wanted to be the center around which our family orbited. Stanley looked uncomfortable when she made this announcement, glancing between us with obvious anxiety. Mom, you don't mind, do you? We just thought it might be nice to start hosting now that we have the house. Their house, a modern 3-bedroom, in a new development that they could barely afford even with both sets of parents contributing to the down payment. It had an open concept layout that photographed beautifully, but lacked the warmth and character of a home where families had actually gathered for decades. Of course not, I heard myself saying, because that was always my response to family requests. I think it's wonderful that you want to host. The Thanksgiving dinner was a disaster, though Brianna would never admit it. She had attempted to recreate Pinterest-perfect presentations without understanding the basics of timing, seasoning, or crowd management. The turkey was dry, the side dishes were under-seasoned, and she spent so much time arranging food for photographs that everything was cold by the time we actually ate. But worse than the food was the atmosphere. Brianna had created a seating chart that separated family members who usually sat together, apparently to optimize the lighting for photos. She stationed herself at the head of the table, traditionally Robert's spot, then mine after his death, and spent most of the meal directing people to pose for various shots rather than engaging in conversation. When my 8-year-old grandson asked for seconds on mashed potatoes, Brianna cheerfully informed him that he'd already had plenty and children needed to learn portion control. When George's wife tried to help clear plates, Brianna insisted that guests shouldn't work and then left the dishes sitting for hours while she edited photos on her phone. I bit my tongue through all of it, but I could see the confusion and disappointment on my children's faces. This wasn't how our family gatherings had ever felt, performative rather than warm, controlled rather than spontaneous, focused on documentation rather than connection. Christmas was worse. Brianna decided that our traditional gift exchange was too chaotic and implemented a secret Santa system with a $50 spending limit that eliminated the spontaneous generosity that had always characterized our holidays. She also announced that she would be providing all the food, then served a selection of expensive but cold appetizers from Whole Foods instead of the home-cooked feast we all expected. When Penelope asked about my traditional Christmas cookies, a recipe I'd learned from my mother and had been making for 35 years, Brianna explained that she was trying to create a more sophisticated holiday experience and hoped everyone would understand her vision. My grandchildren, accustomed to spending Christmas morning opening presents around my tree before coming together for a large family dinner, sat quietly in Brianna's minimally decorated living room, clearly confused by the sudden transformation of their holiday traditions. But it was Easter that revealed the true extent of Brianna's campaign to marginalize me within my own family. She announced that she would be hosting a spring celebration brunch instead of our traditional Easter dinner, complete with a professional photographer to capture what she called the aesthetic evolution of our family traditions. When I asked if I could contribute my traditional hot cross buns, a recipe that had been in our family for 3 generations, Brianna smiled sympathetically and explained that she had already ordered pastries from a trendy bakery downtown. I just want everything to feel cohesive, she said, using her favorite word for excluding anything that didn't match her Instagram-worthy vision. You understand, don't you? The Easter brunch featured beautiful but tiny portions of food that left everyone hungry, conversation that felt stilted because we were constantly being photographed, and an atmosphere so focused on appearance over substance that my youngest grandchildren asked when the real Easter celebration would begin. But the most painful moment came when Brianna presented what she called a family traditions update slideshow, featuring photos from the holidays she had hosted alongside suggestions for modernizing other family customs. She proposed eliminating birthday dinners in favor of restaurant celebrations, replacing my annual summer barbecue with a catered garden party, and establishing new, streamlined approaches to holiday gift-giving and family communications. The slideshow felt like a systematic dismantling of everything I had built to hold our family together. Each tradition she suggested eliminating or updating was something I had created, maintained, or treasured. She was essentially proposing to erase my role as the family's emotional center and replace it with her vision of a more curated family experience. Stanley sat through this presentation looking increasingly uncomfortable, but he didn't object. My other children exchanged glances that communicated their displeasure, but they didn't speak up either. Everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells around Brianna, afraid of creating conflict or seeming resistant to change. After the brunch, as I drove home alone to my empty house, I felt something shifting inside me. For months, I had been making excuses for Brianna's behavior, telling myself she was young and would mature, that she was simply trying to find her place in our family. But this presentation had made her intentions clear. She didn't want to find her place in our existing family structure. She wanted to rebuild that structure around herself. The traditions she was so eager to eliminate weren't just arbitrary customs. They were the threads that wove our family together across generations. The rituals that had comforted us through losses and celebrated our joys. They represented decades of my labor, love, and intentional creation of family bonds. For the first time since Brianna had entered our lives, I allowed myself to feel angry instead of accommodating. Not the explosive anger that destroys relationships, but the cold, clear anger that comes from finally seeing a situation for what it really is. Brianna had made a crucial miscalculation. She had assumed that because I had been gracious and accommodating, for 3 years, I would continue to be gracious and accommodating indefinitely. She had mistaken my patience for weakness, my love for my family for unlimited tolerance of disrespect. She was about to learn that even the most patient grandmother has limits, and that crossing those limits carries consequences she couldn't begin to imagine. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early June, just as I was finishing my walk around the property with Molly. Stanley's voice sounded strained, artificially, cheerful in the way that meant he was delivering news he knew I wouldn't like. "Hey, Mom, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Brianna and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if we skipped the family barbecue this year." My annual 4th of July barbecue had been a cornerstone of our family's summer for over 20 years. It was the one event that brought together not just my children and grandchildren, but also the extended network of neighbors, family friends, and former colleagues who had become part of our chosen family over the decades. "Skipped it?" I repeated, sinking into my kitchen chair. "Stanley, I've already ordered the fireworks. Mrs. Henderson is bringing her famous potato salad, and your cousin Mike is driving down from Seattle specifically for this." I know, Stanley said quickly, and Brianna feels terrible about the timing. It's just that she's been invited to this really important influencer retreat in the Hamptons that same weekend. It's a huge opportunity for her brand, and she can't reschedule it. The influencer retreat. Of course. In Brianna's hierarchy of priorities, building her social media presence, which generated sporadic income at best, ranked higher than maintaining family traditions that had sustained us for decades. "What about you?" I asked. "You could still come, couldn't you?" The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Well, Brianna really wants me there for support. and honestly, Mom, some of the people she'll be networking with could be really good connections for my practice, too. It was a lie, and we both knew it. Stanley was a dental technician in a small Oregon town. The influencers gathering in the Hamptons were not going to become his patients or refer business to him. But he had become so accustomed to reshaping his life around Brianna's desires that he could no longer distinguish between her needs and his own. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring out at the backyard where Robert had built the deck specifically for hosting these gatherings. 23 years of Independence Day celebrations, and now I would be calling dozens of people to cancel because my son's wife had decided our family tradition was less important than her Instagram networking opportunities. But it was George, who delivered the truly devastating news 2 days later when he stopped by to help me with some yard work. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I don't think you're going to like it. He paused in his weeding to look at me directly. Brianna has been calling around to family members. She's been telling people that you're getting older and the big gatherings are becoming too much for you to handle. I felt the blood drain from my face. She said what? She told Aunt Margaret that you were having trouble keeping up with hosting duties and that it would be kinder if people didn't expect so much from you anymore. She said the family needed to start thinking about transitioning responsibilities to the younger generation. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. By positioning herself as concerned about my well-being, Brianna was creating a narrative that painted me as elderly and declining, while casting herself as the thoughtful daughter-in-law looking out for my best interests. Did you tell her that's not true? I asked, though I already knew the answer from George's uncomfortable expression. I tried to, but you know how she is. She just smiled and said she was sure you'd never admit you needed help because you're so independent and proud. She made it sound like anyone who disagreed with her assessment was being inconsiderate of your needs. It was a masterful bit of psychological manipulation. Brianna had created a situation where defending my capabilities would make me seem defensive, while agreeing with her assessment would confirm her narrative of my decline. Anyone who tried to support me would appear to be selfishly forcing an elderly woman to overextend herself. The real genius of her strategy became clear over the following weeks, as family members began treating me with a new kind of careful solicitousness. Penelope started insisting on bringing pre-made dishes when she visited instead of letting me cook for her. My sister-in-law called to ask if I needed help with grocery shopping. Even my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who was 3 years older than me, began speaking to me with the patronizing gentleness reserved for the infirm. Brianna had successfully planted seeds of doubt about my competence and independence in the minds of people who had known me for decades. She had turned my family's love for me into a weapon against my autonomy, making them complicit in her campaign to marginalize me. The most painful part was watching Stanley's growing discomfort with his family. When we did gather for smaller occasions, he seemed tense and apologetic, constantly checking his phone for messages from Brianna and cutting visits short to accommodate her schedule. He had lost weight, developed a nervous tic of running his hands through his hair, and seemed to have forgotten how to relax in his childhood home. But it was a conversation I accidentally overheard that truly opened my eyes to how far Brianna's influence had spread. I had arrived at Stanley and Brianna's house for what I thought was a casual dinner, but I could hear raised voices through the kitchen window as I approached the front door. I paused, not wanting to interrupt what sounded like a serious conversation. "Your mother is becoming a real problem," Brianna was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. "She doesn't understand boundaries, Stanley. She still acts like she's the center of this family when we're adults now with our own lives." "She's not that bad," Stanley replied weakly. "She's not that bad?" "Stanley, she calls you 3 times a week. She drops by without calling ahead. She still tries to give you advice about your job, your finances, your life. It's not normal for a grown man to be so enmeshed with his mother." The word enmeshed felt like a slap. It was therapy speak, clinical language that transformed a loving relationship between mother and son into something pathological and unhealthy. I just don't want to hurt her feelings, Stanley said. And what about my feelings? Brianna's voice rose. What about our marriage? I feel like I'm competing with your mother for your attention, and that's not healthy for either of us. Something has to change, Stanley. Either you set some real boundaries with her, or I will. Standing on their doorstep, listening to my son's wife describe our relationship as a threat to their marriage, I finally understood what I was truly up against. This wasn't about holiday hosting or family traditions or social media networking. This was about Brianna's need to be the sole female authority in Stanley's life, and I was the obstacle that needed to be removed. I drove home from Stanley and Brianna's house that night with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, the word enmeshed echoing in my mind like a curse. For 3 days, I barely left my property, walking Molly through the gardens while trying to process what I had heard. The clinical coldness with which Brianna had dissected my relationship with Stanley felt like a violation deeper than any insult could have been. But it was the phone call from Penelope on Friday morning that forced me back into action. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me, she said without preamble. Are you feeling overwhelmed lately with maintaining the house and everything? My heart sank. Why would you ask that? Brianna called me yesterday. She's concerned about you living alone in that big house, especially after what happened with Mrs. Patterson down the road. Mrs. Patterson, our 83-year-old neighbor, had fallen in her kitchen 2 weeks ago and wasn't found for 6 hours. She thinks maybe it's time to start thinking about alternatives. Alternatives. The word hung in the air between us like a threat. Penelope, I'm 67 years old, not 97. I'm in perfect health, and I have Molly for company. There's nothing wrong with my living situation. I know, Penelope said quickly. But Brianna made some good points about emergency preparedness and social isolation. She thinks maybe you should consider one of those nice senior communities where you'd have people around and activities. Senior communities? I interrupted. Penelope, did you actually suggest to your daughter-in-law that your mother should be put in a nursing home? It's not a nursing home, Mom. These places are more like active adult communities. And I didn't suggest anything. She brought it up as something to think about for the future. But I could hear the doubt in Penelope's voice. Brianna had successfully planted seeds of concern in my daughter's mind, making her question my independence and safety. It was the same manipulation she had used to convince the family I was becoming too old to host gatherings, now escalated to questioning my ability to live alone. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it was George. Mom, Brianna mentioned she's planning a birthday celebration for you next month. She wanted to coordinate with Penelope and me about what you might like. My 68th birthday was 6 weeks away, hardly an urgent planning matter. But I was beginning to understand that Brianna never did anything without multiple motives. That's thoughtful of her, I said carefully. What did she have in mind? She was thinking maybe a nice dinner at that new restaurant downtown, followed by some kind of spa day. She said she thought you deserved to be pampered for once instead of always being the one taking care of everyone else. Again, the language of concern masquerading as something more calculating. I had never expressed any desire for spa treatments or fancy restaurant dinners. My birthday preferences had always run toward family gatherings at home, with homemade cake and the comfortable chaos of grandchildren running around my garden. Did she mention anything else? I asked. George hesitated. She thought it might be nice to invite some of your friends from the catering business. You know, people you haven't seen in a while. She said it would be good for you to reconnect with your social circle. My former colleagues, women who had seen me at my professional peak, who remembered me as competent and successful. Brianna wanted them there as witnesses to whatever she was planning. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Brianna was orchestrating a public birthday celebration where she could position herself as the devoted daughter-in-law, caring for an aging mother-in-law, while simultaneously demonstrating to my former professional network that I was now dependent on her generosity and consideration. But it was Stanley's call that evening that confirmed my worst suspicions. "Mom, I hope you don't mind that Brianna took the initiative on your birthday plans. She's really excited about putting together something special for you." "Of course not," I lied. "It sounds lovely." She also thought, and I hope this doesn't sound weird, but she thought it might be nice to document the celebration. You know, get some professional photos, maybe even a little video montage of people sharing their favorite memories of you. She says she wants to help preserve family history. Preserve family history, or create a record of my supposed decline that could be used later to support arguments about my competence and independence. "She's thought of everything," I said, marveling at the thoroughness of Brianna's manipulation. "She really has. She even found this photographer who specializes in family milestone events, and she's arranged for the whole thing to be recorded so we'll have it forever." I hung up the phone feeling like I was staring into an abyss. Brianna had crafted a perfect trap, a birthday celebration that would appear generous and loving to outside observers while actually serving as a public demonstration of my supposed dependency on her care and consideration. The guest list would include family members already primed to see me as declining, former colleagues who would witness my new status, as charity case rather than peer, and professional documentation that could be used later to support whatever narrative Brianna chose to construct about my mental state and capabilities. But as I sat in my kitchen that night, looking out at the gardens Robert and I had built together, I felt something crystallizing inside me. For 3 years, I had been reacting to Brianna's moves, always one step behind her manipulation, always trying to preserve peace rather than protect myself. Not this time. If Brianna wanted to turn my birthday into a public performance, then I would give her a performance she would never forget. She had made the mistake of assuming that because I had been accommodating and gracious, I was incapable of strategy and calculation. She was about to learn that a woman who had built a successful business from nothing, raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband's death, and maintained the emotional center of a large extended family for decades, possessed skills that went far beyond baking cookies and hosting holidays. If she wanted to play games with my reputation and independence, then we would play games. But this time, I would be setting the rules. The sweet, accommodating grandmother was about to disappear forever, and what emerged in her place would be something Brianna was entirely unprepared to handle. The morning of my 68th birthday dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect September day that made Oregon's coast look like a postcard. I had spent the previous 3 weeks preparing for what I knew would be Brianna's carefully orchestrated performance, but I had also been making preparations of my own. The restaurant Brianna had chosen was Cascade View, an upscale establishment, downtown that catered to tourists and special occasions. I arrived precisely on time, wearing a navy dress that struck the perfect balance between elegant and understated, the kind of outfit that photographed well but didn't scream for attention. The private dining room was already bustling with activity when I walked in. Brianna had outdone herself with the decorations, tasteful floral arrangements, professional lighting that had been adjusted for optimal photography, and place cards written in calligraphy that positioned each guest with obvious intention. "Anna Marie!" Brianna swept toward me with arms outstretched, her smile brilliant and her voice pitched perfectly for the photographer who was already capturing our spontaneous greeting. "You look absolutely beautiful. How does it feel to be the guest of honor for once, instead of always taking care of everyone else?" The comment was delivered with practiced warmth, but I could see the calculation behind it. She was establishing the narrative from the first moment. Poor Anna Marie, always serving others, finally being served herself by her thoughtful daughter-in-law. "It feels wonderful," I replied with genuine warmth, because it did feel wonderful. Just not for the reasons Brianna imagined. The guest list was exactly what I had expected. My children and their families, of course, along with several former colleagues from my catering business whom I hadn't seen in years. Brianna had also invited two of her own friends, young women I didn't know, but who clearly served as witnesses to her performance of devoted family care. But it was the presence of Mrs. Chen from the Senior Services Office that confirmed my worst suspicions about Brianna's intentions. Mrs. Chen worked with families navigating care transitions for elderly relatives, and her presence at my birthday dinner could only mean one thing. Brianna was building a case for my incompetence with professional witnesses. "Anna Marie, you remember Mrs. Chen from the community center?" Brianna said sweetly as she introduced us. "She works with families who are thinking about future planning and care transitions. I thought you two might enjoy chatting." Mrs. Chen smiled politely, but I could see her assessing me with professional eyes, noting my appearance, my demeanor, my responsiveness. She was clearly here in some semi-official capacity, gathering impressions that could later be used to support claims about my mental state or need for assistance. Dinner proceeded with Brianna orchestrating every moment like a director managing a film shoot. She made sure the photographer captured her helping me with my chair, adjusting my napkin and cutting my food into smaller pieces. Gestures that appeared caring, but were calculated to make me look helpless and dependent. "Let's go around the table and share our favorite memories of Anna Marie," Brianna announced as dessert was served. "I'll start." She launched into a carefully crafted speech about how grateful she was to have me as a mother-in-law, how much she had learned from my example of grace in aging, and how important it was for families to support their elderly members through life transitions. Grace in aging. Elderly members, life transitions. Every phrase was chosen to reinforce the narrative of my decline and her role as my caretaker. One by one, my former colleagues shared memories of our professional collaboration, but their stories felt stilted, as if they were participating in some kind of memorial service for someone who wasn't quite dead yet. I could see confusion in their eyes as they tried to reconcile their memories of me as a capable business owner with the frail figure Brianna was presenting. But it was when the videographer appeared that I realized the true scope of Brianna's plan. "I arranged for a little surprise," Brianna announced, her voice bright with false excitement. "I thought it would be wonderful to create a memory video for Anna Marie, something she can treasure, and that we can all look back on as a beautiful record of this special day." The videographer began moving around the table, asking guests to share their thoughts about me directly to the camera. The questions were leading: "What would you want Anna Marie to know about how much she means to you?" And "What are your hopes for Anna Marie's future happiness and comfort?" The phrasing was careful, designed to elicit responses that sounded like eulogies or testimonials for someone whose active life was ending. My former colleagues, caught off guard and trying to be kind, found themselves giving speeches that reinforced Brianna's narrative about my need for care and support. "Anna Marie has always been such an inspiration," my former business partner Sarah said uncertainly to the camera. "I hope she knows how much joy she's brought to all of our lives, and I hope the years ahead bring her peace and comfort." Peace and comfort. The language of retirement homes and assisted living facilities. Stanley looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evening progressed, clearly sensing that something was wrong but unable to identify exactly what. When his turn came to speak to the camera, he stumbled over his words, talking about how grateful he was for everything I had done for him and how he wanted to make sure I was taken care of in return. Taken care of. Another phrase that positioned me as a burden rather than an autonomous adult. But it was when Brianna herself addressed the camera that her true intentions became crystal clear. "I just want to say how blessed our family is to have Anna Marie," she said, dabbing at her eyes with practiced emotion. "She's been the heart of this family for so long, and now it's our turn to be the heart that supports her. I promise that, no matter what challenges the future brings, and we all know that aging can bring unexpected challenges, Anna Marie will never have to face them alone." Unexpected challenges. Aging. The language was clinical, preparing the audience for future claims about my declining capacity. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I maintained my gracious smile and thanked everyone for coming. But I could feel the shift in how people were treating me. The extra gentle hugs, the concerned looks, the way conversations suddenly stopped when I approached. Brianna had successfully reframed my identity in the minds of everyone present. I was no longer Anna Marie, the successful businesswoman, the capable family matriarch, the independent widow managing her own life with dignity. I was now Anna Marie, the aging mother-in-law who needed to be handled with care and managed with patience. The professional documentation of this transformation was the masterstroke. Brianna now had video evidence of my family and friends expressing concern for my future well-being, testimonials that could be edited and presented to support any narrative she chose to construct about my mental state or need for intervention. As I drove home that night, I felt a cold fury settling over me that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Brianna had turned my own birthday celebration into a weapon against my independence, using my family's love for me as a tool to undermine my autonomy. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had assumed that because I had been accommodating and gracious for 3 years, I was incapable of strategic thinking and long-term planning. She was about to discover just how wrong she was about that. 3 weeks after my birthday dinner, Brianna called with what she described as the most wonderful surprise. Her voice carried that artificial excitement I had learned to dread, the tone that meant she was about to inflict another carefully planned humiliation disguised as kindness. "Anna Marie, I've been thinking about what you said at dinner about missing your old hair routine," she began, though I had said no such thing. "And I've arranged for something really special. There's this amazing stylist I follow on Instagram. She specializes in age-appropriate cuts for mature women, and she's agreed to come to your house for a consultation. My hair. Of course it would be about my hair. For months I had noticed Brianna's subtle comments about my appearance, suggestions that I might benefit from updating my look, observations about how certain styles were more flattering for women my age, links to articles about the importance of age-appropriate grooming sent via text with cheerful emojis. My silver hair, which I had worn shoulder-length for over a decade, had become another target in her campaign to transform me into her vision of what a proper elderly mother-in-law should look like. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully. "But I'm quite happy with my current stylist." "Oh, but Anna Marie, this is different. Madison specializes in transformations for women who are transitioning into their golden years. She has such an eye for what works with mature skin tones and facial structures. Plus, she documents all her work for educational purposes. She's building a portfolio of age-positive beauty transformations." Educational purposes. Documentation. The word sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't about improving my appearance. This was about creating visual evidence of my supposed transformation from independent woman to managed elderly relative. "Really don't think," I began, but Brianna cut me off with practiced enthusiasm. "I've already scheduled her for this Saturday afternoon. The whole family will be there. It'll be like a little party. Stanley is so excited to see you pampered. For once. And Madison said she might even film parts of it for her YouTube channel about empowering mature women through style updates. A YouTube channel. Professional documentation. The family as witnesses." I could see the entire setup with crystal clarity. Another performance designed to reinforce the narrative of my decline, this time with my physical transformation as the centerpiece. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. I spent the morning in my garden, tending to the roses that would soon need protection from the coming frost. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was caring for plants that would survive the winter while Brianna plotted to prune away my dignity. They arrived en masse at 2 o'clock. Brianna and Stanley, George and Penelope with their families, and Madison, AIEE young woman in her 20s with aggressively stylish hair and a professional camera setup that she began arranging in my living room without asking permission. Anna Marie. Brianna swept into my house like she owned it, followed by Madison, who immediately began assessing my space with the calculating eye of someone planning a performance. Madison, this is Stanley's mother I was telling you about. Isn't she gorgeous? She has such beautiful bone structure. She's going to photograph amazingly. Madison circled me like a predator, taking photos from various angles while murmuring, "Professional observations." Yes, I can see exactly what we're working with here. Classic bone structure, beautiful silver color, but definitely styling choices from a different era. We can absolutely bring her into the modern age while keeping things age-appropriate? Age-appropriate. The phrase had become a weapon in Brianna's arsenal, a way to diminish any choice I made about my own appearance by suggesting it was unsuitable for someone my age. My grandchildren had been positioned on the couch with tablets to keep them occupied, but I could see them glancing up nervously at the unusual activity. Even they seemed to sense that something was happening that wasn't quite right. So I'm thinking we start with a consultation about face shape and lifestyle, Madison announced to the room, her camera already rolling. At 68, Anna Marie is at that beautiful stage where she can really embrace a more carefree, low-maintenance look that celebrates her natural silver. 68 years old. She had opened with my age, immediately establishing me as elderly for her audience before I had even spoken a word. Actually, I said quietly, I'm quite happy with my current style. Madison smiled with practiced patience, the expression of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult elderly clients. Oh, I completely understand that resistance. Change can feel scary at any age, but especially when we've been wearing the same style for many years. But trust me, once you see how much more youthful and contemporary you'll look, you'll wonder why you waited so long. She guided me to a chair she had positioned for optimal lighting, beginning to run her fingers through my hair while commenting for the camera about texture, growth patterns, and styling challenges. I felt like livestock being evaluated at auction. Now, the length is really the biggest issue here, Madison continued, lifting sections of my hair to show the camera. At Anna Marie's age, long hair can actually be quite aging and even inappropriate. We want to give her something that's more in line with current expectations for mature women. Inappropriate. The word hung in the air like an accusation. My hair I had grown and maintained and taken pride in, was being labeled as unsuitable for someone my age by a girl young enough to be my granddaughter. I think we should go quite short, Madison announced, producing professional scissors from her kit. A nice pixie cut would be so liberating for Anna Marie. No more time-consuming styling routines, no more outdated length, just a fresh, modern, age-appropriate look. The family sat watching like an audience at a show, their faces reflecting various levels of discomfort, but no one speaking up to object. Stanley looked particularly miserable, but he remained silent, trapped between his loyalty to me and his desperate need to keep Brianna happy. Actually, I said, standing up from the chair, I don't think I want to do this today. Madison's smile faltered for the first time. Oh, but Anna Marie, we've already started the documentation, and your family is so excited to see your transformation. My family can see me exactly as I am, I replied firmly. But Brianna stepped forward with that bright, aggressive smile I had learned to fear. Anna Marie, sweetie, you're just having pre-makeover jitters. It's completely normal. But think about how much easier your routine will be with a more manageable style. And honestly, she lowered her voice with fake concern, I've noticed you struggling a bit with styling your hair lately. Maybe something simpler would be better for this stage of your life. Struggling. Stage of my life. In front of my children, my grandchildren, and a stranger with a camera, Brianna was suggesting that I was too feeble to manage my own grooming. I haven't been struggling with anything, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Of course you haven't, sweetie. Brianna replied with patronizing kindness. But we all need a little help sometimes as we get older. There's no shame in that. She nodded to Madison, who moved behind my chair and suddenly grabbed a section of my hair. Before I could react, I heard the sickening snip of scissors cutting through what felt like half my ponytail. The room went silent except for the sound of my hair hitting the hardwood floor. "There," Madison said brightly, as if she had just performed a kindness. "Much better already. Now we can really see your beautiful face." I stared at the clump of silver hair at my feet, hair that had taken years to grow, hair that Robert had loved to braid, hair that had been part of my identity for longer than this girl had been alive. The violation felt physical, like an assault, on my very person. "You cut my hair," I said quietly, the words barely above a whisper. "Just getting started," Madison replied cheerfully, raising the scissors again. "This is going to look so much better when we're finished. Trust the process." Anna Marie, but I was no longer looking at Madison. I was looking at Brianna, whose face was glowing with satisfaction as her camera captured my shock and humiliation. She had orchestrated this moment perfectly. The family as witnesses, the professional documentation, the framing of my resistance, as elderly stubbornness rather than reasonable objection. "Stop," I said, louder this time. "Oh, Anna Marie," Brianna cooed. "You can't stop now. You'll look ridiculous with it half done. Let Madison finish so you can see how beautiful you're going." To look. And that's when she said the words that changed everything. "Don't be so vain, Anna Marie. At your age, worrying about your hair is just disgusting." Disgusting. In front of my children and grandchildren, with cameras rolling, Brianna had called me disgusting for caring about my own appearance. The word hit me like a physical blow, but it also did something else. It crystallized 3 years of accumulated rage into something cold and sharp and utterly focused. I looked around the room at my family, at Stanley's face crumpled with shame, at my other children's horrified expressions, at my grandchildren, staring in confusion at their grandmother being humiliated for their entertainment. And for the first time in 3 years, I smiled at Brianna with genuine warmth. "You're absolutely right," I said softly. How foolish of me to worry about something so trivial. The smile that spread across her face was triumphant, but she had no idea what she had just unleashed. I stood up from the chair slowly, deliberately, my movements controlled despite the storm raging inside me. Madison was still holding her scissors, poised to continue her assault on what remained of my hair, while Brianna's camera captured every moment of what she clearly believed was my capitulation. "You know what, Brianna?" I said, my voice calm and measured. "You're absolutely right. I have been foolishly vain about my appearance." I reached up and touched the ragged remains of my hair where Madison had cut it, feeling the uneven lengths and the violation of what had been done to me. Around the room, my family sat frozen in various states of shock and discomfort, but none of them had spoken up to defend me. "I appreciate you helping me see that," I continued, looking directly at Brianna. "At my age, caring about something, as trivial as my own hair really is, quite—" "What was the word you used? Disgusting?" Stanley flinched visibly, his face pale as he finally seemed to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. But it was too late for his discomfort to matter. "Anna Marie, I didn't mean—" Brianna began, perhaps sensing for the first time that something had shifted in the room's dynamic. "Oh, but you did mean it," I said gently, still smiling. "And you were right to document it. This is exactly the kind of learning experience that should be preserved." I turned to Madison, who was still holding her scissors uncertainly. "Please, continue. I wouldn't want to deprive you of the content you came here to create." Madison glanced nervously between Brianna and me, clearly sensing the undercurrent of tension but not understanding its source. "Well, if you're sure, we could do a really cute pixie cut that would be so much more manageable for you." "Manageable," I repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I think I need to become much more manageable." I sat back down in the chair and closed my eyes as Madison resumed cutting. Each snip of the scissors felt like another chain breaking, another illusion falling away. My beautiful silver hair fell to the floor in uneven chunks, decades of growth destroyed in minutes for the entertainment of people who claimed to love me. When Madison finally stepped back to admire her work, I opened my eyes and looked at myself in the hand mirror she offered. The woman staring back at me was almost unrecognizable, shorn and diminished, transformed into exactly the kind of elderly victim Brianna had been trying to create through months of manipulation. "Perfect," I said quietly. "Absolutely perfect. You look lovely, Anna Marie," Brianna said, though her voice carried less triumph than I would have expected. So much more appropriate. Appropriate. There was that word again. I stood up and walked to where Molly was sitting by the window, clearly distressed by the unusual activity and tension in the house. I knelt down and let her lick my face, taking comfort in the only unconditional love remaining in the room. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice carrying the unmistakable tone of dismissal. "This has been very educational." "Mom," George said uncertainly, "are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied, and strangely, I found that I meant it. Better than I've been in a very long time, actually. I think I finally understand some things that I was confused about before. Stanley approached me hesitantly, his eyes filled with guilt and something that might have been recognition of what he had allowed to happen. "Mom? I'm so sorry. I didn't know she was going to—" "Of course you didn't," I said, patting his arm with maternal gentleness. "You never know what Brianna is going to do until she does it, do you? But that's okay. We all learn at our own pace." As the family gathered their things and prepared to leave, Brianna lingered, clearly wanting to say something but seeming uncertain for the first time since I'd known her. "Anna Marie," she began carefully, "I hope you understand that everything I do comes from a place of love and concern." I looked at her for a long moment, this young woman who had systematically dismantled my life while claiming to care about my well-being. Then I smiled, the same warm, gracious smile I had been giving her for 3 years. "I understand completely," I said, "and I want you to know that everything I do from now on will come from exactly the same place." She left looking vaguely troubled, though she couldn't have known why. After all, I had been nothing but gracious and agreeable, just as she had trained me to be. But as I closed the door behind them and stood alone in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of my hair and the shattered pieces of my old life, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. That night, I stood in my bathroom mirror examining the damage. Madison's pixie cut was nothing more than a hacked mess, uneven, choppy, and clearly done by someone more interested in documenting humiliation than providing actual service. With careful work and my own styling skills from decades of managing my appearance, I managed to create something that looked intentional rather than vandalized. But as I worked, something crystallized in my mind. Brianna had made a fatal error in her campaign against me. She had been so focused on documenting my supposed decline that she had left a digital trail of her own behavior, a trail I was uniquely positioned to follow. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since Robert's death 3 years ago. I called my old business partner, Margaret Torres. Margaret had been the technology brain behind our catering operation, the one who had convinced me to embrace social media marketing and digital record-keeping long before most small businesses understood their importance. "Anna Marie," Margaret's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "I was just thinking about you after that lovely dinner last month. How are you holding up?" That lovely dinner, Brianna's carefully orchestrated birthday performance, where Margaret had been manipulated into giving testimonials about my need for care and support. "I'm well, Margaret. Actually, I was hoping you might help me with something. I'd like to learn more about social media investigation. You know, The kind of research companies do on potential employees. There was a pause. That's an interesting request. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, I said carefully. I'm just curious about what information is actually available online about people, particularly younger people who share a lot on social media. Margaret was quiet for a moment, but when she spoke again, her voice carried understanding. Would this have anything to do with your daughter-in-law? I had forgotten how perceptive Margaret was, how well she could read between the lines. Perhaps. Well, she said slowly, I might know someone who could help you understand the basics of digital investigation. No questions asked. 2 days later, I sat in Margaret's home office while her nephew Jackson, a private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases, taught me the fundamentals of social media research. Jackson was in his 30s, soft-spoken, and remarkably thorough. The thing about people who overshare online, he explained, pulling up various social media platforms on Margaret's computer, is that they rarely understand how much information they're actually revealing. Every check-in, every tagged photo, every comment creates a timeline that can be reconstructed. He showed me how to use reverse image searches, how to cross-reference location data, how to identify patterns in posting, behavior that might reveal inconsistencies in someone's story. What exactly are you looking for? He asked gently. Anything that proves someone isn't who they claim to be, I said. Someone who projects one image but lives a different reality. Jackson nodded knowingly. We call that lifestyle discrepancy. It's one of the most common things we investigate. He taught me how to access archived versions of social media posts, how to track deleted content, and most importantly, how to identify connections between accounts that weren't immediately obvious. The key, he explained, is patience and systematic documentation. People who are living double lives eventually make mistakes. They post photos that contradict their stories. They check into places they claim they weren't. They get tagged by people they said they didn't know. I spent the next week learning to navigate this digital landscape I had never understood. Every evening after my garden walks with Molly, I sat at Robert's old desk with Margaret's laptop, methodically working through Jackson's lessons. Brianna's social media presence was extensive. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and several other platforms I had never heard of. She posted multiple times daily, documenting every meal, every outfit, every location. Her feed was a carefully curated display of lifestyle perfection, expensive restaurants, designer clothes, romantic weekend getaways with Stanley. But as Jackson had predicted, the very thoroughness of her documentation created opportunities for investigation. I began creating spreadsheets, skills from my catering business proving unexpectedly useful, tracking her locations, her companions, her activities. The first discrepancy I found was small, a post about a girls' weekend in Portland that coincided with Stanley working a dental conference in Seattle. But when I cross-referenced the restaurant where she claimed to be dining with her female friends, I found tagged photos from the same evening showing her with a man I didn't recognize. The man's name was Mike Rodriguez, a personal trainer from Portland, recently divorced, with his own substantial social media presence. As I dug deeper into his posts, a pattern began to emerge. Locations that matched Brianna's check-ins, restaurants they had both visited on, the same days, hiking trails they had both photographed within hours of each other. But it was when I found the vacation photos that I knew I had found what I was looking for. Brianna had posted carefully cropped images from what she claimed was a solo wellness retreat in Bend. But Mike's unfiltered account showed the same locations, the same hotel room, even the same meals, all taken during the weekend when Stanley believed his wife was on a spiritual journey of self-discovery. The affair had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of carefully planned deceptions, of Stanley working extra hours to fund weekend trips that were actually rendezvous with another man. of Brianna using their marriage as cover for a relationship that made a mockery of everything Stanley believed about his life. I sat back in Robert's chair, looking at the evidence spread across multiple browser windows, feeling something I hadn't experienced in 3 years of accumulated humiliations. I felt powerful. Brianna had spent months documenting my supposed decline, creating digital evidence of my need for management and care. But in her arrogance and carelessness, she had created something far more damaging: digital evidence of her own deception and betrayal. Now it was time to decide what to do with that power. I spent 3 more days perfecting my documentation, building a case that would be impossible to deny or dismiss. Screenshots with timestamps, cross-referenced location data, a complete timeline of Brianna's deception. Jackson had taught me well. Every piece of evidence was archived and backed up in multiple locations, but simply exposing the affair wouldn't be enough. Brianna had spent months systematically destroying my reputation within my own family, positioning me as elderly and declining while casting herself as the devoted caretaker. Any revelation about her behavior needed to be accompanied by a complete dismantling of the narrative she had so carefully constructed. The plan that emerged was simple in its elegance and devastating in its precision. On Tuesday morning, I drove to the Millbrook Community Center, where I had volunteered for over a decade. The staff welcomed me warmly. These were people who knew me as the capable woman who had organized countless fundraisers and community events, not the declining elderly figure Brianna had tried to create. "Mrs. Whitfield," called Janet Morrison, the center's director. "We've missed you these past few months. How are you doing?" "I'm wonderful, Janet. Actually, I was hoping to use the computer lab for a little presentation I'm putting together, something for the family." "Of course. You know you're always welcome here." The community center's computer lab was equipped with professional presentation software and a large screen perfect for displaying digital content. I spent the morning creating what I called a Family Truth Initiative, a comprehensive slideshow that would tell the complete story of the past 8 months. The presentation began with Brianna's own words and images, screenshots of her social media posts about caring for aging family members, clips from the birthday video where she discussed my transition into later life, and photos from the hair-cutting incident where she had called me disgusting. But then came the evidence of her double life, side-by-side photos showing her solo retreat that was actually a romantic getaway with Mike, messages between them that I had recovered using Jackson's techniques, credit card receipts that Stanley had unknowingly paid for her affairs. The final section was devoted to financial documentation. I had discovered that Brianna had been using Stanley's credit cards not just for her personal expenses, but for lavish gifts to Mike, dinners, hotel rooms, even a weekend trip to San Francisco that Stanley believed was a work conference. But I wasn't planning to show this presentation to my family. Not yet. That afternoon, I uploaded the entire presentation to a private YouTube channel, setting it to unlisted, so it could only be accessed by people with the direct link. Then I created a simple website using one of the free services Jackson had shown me, hosting all the evidence in an organized, easily navigable format. The website was professional, factual, and devastating. I called it The Truth About Brianna Morrison and structured it like a legal brief, chronological evidence with supporting documentation for every claim. Finally, I composed a series of emails, one to Stanley with the subject line, "Important, information about your marriage." Others to George, Penelope, and key family members who had witnessed Brianna's campaign against me. Each email contained a brief explanation and links to both the website and the presentation. But I also sent copies to Brianna's parents, her close friends, and several of the brands she had partnerships with as an influencer. If she wanted to play the game of public reputation management, then she would learn what it felt like when someone with actual organizational skills played the same game. The emails were scheduled to be sent automatically on Friday at 3 p.m., Same time Brianna typically posted her weekend preview content to social media, when her engagement would be highest and the maximum number of people would see the fallout. I also contacted Madison, the stylist who had participated in my humiliation. Her YouTube channel about empowering mature women would receive a different kind of content than she had expected, a detailed account of how she had been used to assault an elderly woman for entertainment purposes, complete with her own recorded footage. But my final step was the most important. I called the local newspaper's community affairs reporter, Sarah Kim, whom I had worked with on numerous charity event promotions over the years. "Sarah, it's Anna Marie Whitfield. I have a story that might interest you about elder abuse and social media exploitation. Are you free for coffee tomorrow?" "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield. You know I always have time for you." By Thursday evening, everything was in place. The evidence was documented, the narrative was prepared, and the distribution network was ready. Brianna had spent months building a false story about my decline and dependency. In 72 hours, the truth about her character would be available to everyone who had ever believed her performance. I sat in my garden that evening with Molly at my feet, watching the sun set over the property Robert and I had built together. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again, not the diminished, managed elderly woman Brianna had tried to create, but the strategic, capable woman who had built a successful business and raised 3 children. Friday afternoon. Couldn't come soon enough. Friday at 3:07 p.m., my phone began ringing. The first call was from Stanley, his voice shaking with disbelief and rage. "Mom, I got your email. I don't understand." "How long have you known?" "Long enough to be certain," I replied calmly. "I'm sorry you had to learn about it this way, sweetheart, but I thought you deserved to know the truth." The second call came 20 minutes later from George. "Jesus, Mom, how did you find all this? And why didn't you tell us what Brianna was doing to you?" "Because," I said, settling into Robert's chair with Molly at my feet, "sometimes people need to see the evidence for themselves before they can accept what's been happening right in front of them." By evening, the digital destruction was complete. Brianna's social media accounts had been flooded with comments and messages from people who had seen the evidence. 3 of her brand partnerships had already terminated their contracts. Mike Rodriguez had deleted his entire Instagram account, but it was the call from Penelope that meant the most to me. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with tears, "I am so ashamed of how we let her treat you. We should have seen it. We should have protected you." "You couldn't see it because she was very skilled at manipulation," I replied, "and because I allowed it to happen for too long." The newspaper article ran the following Tuesday with the headline, "Digital Age Elder Abuse: How Social Media Can Be Weaponized Against Seniors." Sarah Kim had interviewed Jackson about the investigation techniques, several experts about emotional abuse patterns, and me about the importance of seniors understanding their digital rights. Brianna left town within 2 weeks. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly once Stanley's lawyer reviewed the financial evidence of her using marital funds for the affair. The prenuptial agreement she had insisted upon, designed to protect her social media brand, became her downfall when her public behavior violated its fidelity clauses. Stanley moved back into my guest room temporarily while he rebuilt his life. The first morning he was there, I made his favorite breakfast and we sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had both learned hard lessons about trust and boundaries. "I'm sorry I let her isolate you from us," he said finally. "You weren't equipped to recognize what she was doing," I replied. "But you are now." 3 months later, my hair had grown out enough to style properly, and I had resumed hosting family gatherings. But something fundamental had changed in our dynamics. My children no longer took my presence for granted or assumed my accommodation was unlimited. Madison's YouTube channel had been demonetized after my video response went viral, titled, "What Really Happened During My Makeover." she had learned. That documenting abuse for content carried consequences she hadn't anticipated. As for me, I discovered that there was life after being systematically diminished and rebuilt. I was no longer the accommodating grandmother who smoothed over every conflict. I was a woman who had faced down a calculated enemy and emerged victorious through patience, strategy, and the careful application of truth. Some people had called my response excessive, but they hadn't lived through months of having their competence questioned, their independence undermined, and their dignity stripped away piece by piece. Justice isn't always gentle. Sometimes it requires a grandmother's firm hand, and sometimes the people who mistake kindness for weakness learn exactly how wrong they were about that. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.